A continuación nos complace presentarle al señor Rob Bennett, CEO de Ecodistritos. El señor Bennett, que se encuentra con nosotros, ha liderado Ecodistritos en los últimos 5 años. Ha desarrollado programas pilotos residenciales en las ciudades de Houston, Chicago. Además, lideró el desarrollo de la estrategia de construcción verde de Vancouver y facilitó las actividades de construcción y de infraestructura verde para la Villa Olímpica 2010. El señor Bennett nos presentará el tema Metodología para la implementación de ecodistritos. Gracias y bienvenido.
Yeah, no, it's all set here. It's just make the transition slide. Okay. It'll just take a minute, I guess. Here we go. Great. Need sound. Okay.
Oregon is a city of many nicknames. We're known as Bridgetown, the City of Roses. We're also called Stumptown, a reminder that Portland sits on a valley once covered in lush, dense forest. Like so many cities, Portland grew by replacing nature with pavement, concrete, and steel. But the farther trees, wildlife, and farmland were pushed away, the less habitable our city became. And like cities the world over, the more we polluted our rivers and streams and air, the less people wanted to live here. So here in Portland, we've earned a new nickname: Green City. The idea is that we're bringing back all the things we spent so many years pushing away. We're investing billions to clean our rivers and add to our public transportation network. We're building eco-districts and restoring habitats. Because we believe if we can build cities that are vibrant and adaptable, then we can create places that use fewer resources, create less waste, and grow our industries. So how did we do it? Well, it was a community effort. Because you know who likes green cities?
Us.
People.
Human beings.
The natural resource that
every city already has
is all you need to turn the city green.
People want to eat fresh, local foods and drink clean water.
They want to hear birds sing in the morning
and breathe fresh air.
They want to walk amongst trees during the day
and see stars at night.
We have a primal need to be close to these things.
And by bringing these things
back to our city,
we made our neighborhood safer,
created jobs,
and fostered culture.
For the last 40 years, we've worked to bring nature back into the city so that we can do more with less. We've built over 900 bioswales, allowing rainwater to green our city rather than flood our rivers. We've made sure over 130 buildings are LEED certified. We've built a 64-mile light rail and streetcar network that has sparked over $11 billion in new development and revitalized buildings. We've created 324 miles of bikeways and created a cycling culture that adds $90 million to the local economy each year. We've installed over 1 million square feet of solar panels. And we offer wind-powered energy to thousands of households and businesses. By 2025, a quarter of our power will come from renewable energy. This spirit of craft, innovation, and community has helped to lower carbon emissions by 22% per person since 1990. A race is on. We need to figure out how cities can allow people to live well without damaging our habitat. Many places are talking about this, but we're doing it. The people of Portland are changing their city, experimenting, learning, discovering what works to create a high-growth, low-carbon city. And we'd love to work with your city and share what we've learned. Portland. We build green cities.
This was a film that our former mayor produced as a way to express the opportunities within the architecture development and finance community to take what we've learned and ultimately work with other cities around the world. And what's I think important is the recognition that it's a huge economic opportunity for cities to move forward, not just in green buildings and not just in regional planning, but really thinking about the district scale. And that's the work that we do at Ecodistrics. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about our work over the next few minutes. We're about vibrant neighborhoods and the role that neighborhoods have in converting cities from less than livable, less than productive. In my city, Portland was one of those many cities in the US that 40 years ago was dying. It was a city in which many people were leaving. We were tearing buildings down. We had terrible air quality. And over 40 years, we really changed that story. And the economics around that redevelopment of the city are profound. Since 1990, we have reduced emissions per capita now over 25%, while growing the total economy by 65%. I know Eric's going to talk next about greenhouse gas emissions and energy planning for cities. We have to go faster, and as the mayor told us this morning, it's a significant threat to cities, and we have to figure out how to game change at a scale that we haven't been able to yet. But the role of cities to help execute low carbon strategies are incredibly important and allow the rapid transformation when we decarbonize our electric grid and when we decarbonize our transit systems to really get to that next level. From our perspective, there's a tremendous opportunity that the neighborhood or district scale provides. It provides our green building industry, it provides our city planners and urban designers a way to start to work at many levels at the same time. As the mayor talked about this morning, cities are under increasing amounts of threat and challenge to take on more and more responsibilities, climate change being one of the most significant. Cities barely registered around climate change 20 years ago. My city was the first to have a climate action plan that was first adopted in 1993. But now we're looking at food insecurity, and we're looking at obesity and public health. Cities are having to wrestle with resource constraints and water flooding and other impacts of climate change. That means that our public investments and private investments have to do more, and every dollar we spend has to be leveraged towards better outcomes. And the good news is that there's a growing demand for this work. Obviously, this conference and those who are making the green building movement happen here in Central America know that this is a growing sector, and it's our job, and all of us in this room, to build that movement in that marketplace. In the US alone, there's over 50,000 multiple block projects that get entitled by cities every year. That means there's projects coming forth that are at scale, and there's an opportunity to do things that we traditionally don't do with those projects. This district is an interesting example of the kind of development we see in the US, where we rarely think about linking the building's energy systems. We rarely think about the placemaking and the transportation network that serves those buildings, and what we call the last mile strategies at the district level. I thought the mayor's comments this morning about really recognizing the need for operationalizing transit and pedestrian is really important, because we obviously build here and other cities around the world, we design for the car, and that's a very problematic thing. So I represent a very small nonprofit with big dreams. We are 10 people based in the United States. I came out of the green building world for 10 years. I spent a lot of time in the US helping build the green building market. And now I've turned my attention and our organization's attention in partnership with many to build a green district and neighborhood scale movement and marketplace. We're really passionate about linking many of the agendas that traditionally have not been showing up in green building in the US, for instance, equity and issues of public health and social issues don't register in green building in the US. With district scale work, they become very profound. We say in the US, the zip code, where you were born, where you live, is the single most determinant of the quality of life you'll have. It determines how good your education is going to be. It's going to determine your health and the ability to walk and to feel safe in your neighborhood and to exercise. It determines ultimately how far you go in the world. And so if the neighborhood is the most important determinant of the quality of life that you're going to have, we need to spend a lot of time and energy thinking about how we design and finance our communities. So we have a bit of a theory of change or a model in which urban regeneration we think needs to go. And we use the word and the term urban regeneration to define Ecodistricts' work. And it goes a little bit like this. First, it starts with a very concerted effort around the governance and the leadership and partnerships that you design to execute the projects, and that it's metrics driven. And ultimately, as you all are doing here in Panama with Green Building, we recognize the power of putting metrics in front of projects and then having to hold ourselves accountable to those metrics. It also takes into consideration that in the US and the world over, there are many environmental and social justice and community-based organizations that are doing good work and who rarely are invited in to help us design our communities. We design our communities primarily professionally, and we now and again invite the public to participate. But there's a fair amount of wisdom and expertise in the neighborhoods that we need to draw in and to link up with the traditional urban developers and designers. This is Majora Carter, who's a well-known international advocate, started doing environmental justice work in New York City, where she's from, and has gone on and now recently has been part of the U.S. Green Building Council, and really pushing the U.S. Green Building Council to think about what their equity and their community development strategy is in regards to LEED and the other systems that we all build and use. There's also a recognition that there's a growing appetite and growing number of private sector players and differing kinds of capital that can now flow into projects. This is Tony Hirsch, who is helping redevelop Las Vegas in our country with over $350 million of his own private capital from the sale of his company Zappos to reimagine a very tired part of what was traditionally downtown Las Vegas. He's doing development in a very different way. He's putting $50 million into small business development and into incubator development for technology companies. He's paying attention to and helping invest on the street plane, helping build a park, which the city couldn't and didn't have the resources to do. So he takes a systems view of what it takes to build neighborhood, and it includes economic development, entrepreneurialism. It includes placemaking, and it includes redevelopment of buildings. And then finally, we need to invite into this new model of urban regeneration what I call the disruptors. These are many of the new technology companies that are bringing a tremendous amount of information and new tools to the marketplace. Big data, small data. Information is now so much more available for decision makers who are designing cities. I was recently introduced to a company that is highlighting data in London being able to take public social media, bike movements, transit movements, real-time information that really starts to provide a window into how a community works. And this is information that traditionally hasn't been available to city planners and to urban designers. So there's a rich marketplace of information and companies and individuals who are making this work happen. One of my favorite is a company called WalkScore. Are you familiar with WalkScore in Panama? I don't know if it's made it. It's a very simple algorithm that helps to give a score for the walkability of a community. It was created using GIS information, the network of streets and sidewalks, and also took into consideration the density of commercial and retail, supermarkets, schools. And it gives a score. It's a very simple thing. It has become one of the most powerful drivers of real estate valuation in the US, and has done what planners have been saying and economists have been saying for years about the value and the increased value and competitiveness of walkable community in a way that all those studies and all those planners haven't been able to do for 40 years, because it puts it right into the consumer's hand. It provides a way for the supply chain of real estate to make use of it, and it uses publicly available data. These are important people to invite into this work that, again, traditionally don't show up when we start to think about building cities or neighborhoods or buildings. And why we're so passionate about districts and neighborhoods is it's the place to innovate and be able to look at scaling new solutions. The video I showed of Portland, 2 or 3 of those neighborhoods are new and mixed-use neighborhoods. That we had to break the rules on many levels to get those neighborhoods built, from zoning to how we fund transit, to how we do parks, to how we do green infrastructure. And it now has allowed the city, through regulation and through incentives, to scale that work throughout the rest of the city. So here in Panama City, if you think about what a great green neighborhood or a sustainable neighborhood needs to be, we recommend you start small. The urban lab that the mayor talked about could be a good intervention. And you really concentrate on linking the different components of green neighborhood together in a very concerted and focused way. I mentioned some of this, but in the US, over 80% of our emissions and energy use are in cities, or a result of cities. We're rapidly urbanizing in the US. In the west of the US, over 75 to 80% of us live in cities. And I think you probably have heard the stat that globally we have now gone beyond the threshold of 50% of all people in the world live in cities, and that is expected to grow up to 75% in the next 25 to 40 years. That means we're in an era of massive urbanization. And that urbanization is not simply buildings being built, it's whole stock neighborhoods being transformed, old brownfields being repurposed, and a lot of new greenfield development that's shaping how cities ultimately function. And in the US, we have over $1 trillion of defrayed and deferred maintenance in infrastructure alone. A recent study that gets done annually and updated by the trade group, sort of engineering trade group in the US, gives the US about a D to D plus on the quality of our infrastructure. So much of our infrastructure is old, and we haven't been keeping up with the maintenance. That means we're going to start maintaining that. We have no choice. And the question, of course, for an organization like ours is, what do we do with it, and how can we move that arc of investment towards, in some cases, district scale solutions? You know, and we have a very sad history in the U.S. of urban neighborhood blight and disinvestment, particularly among the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society. And truly, the environmental movement and the environmental justice movement came out of cities and out of these neighborhoods, because in essence, these neighborhoods were killing people. The air toxicity, the water pollution, the lack of sanitation, the lack of core services in many, many neighborhoods across our cities was hurting the most vulnerable. Ironically, I think, and the opportunity for us in green building is we have environmentalists who represent, I think, in this room and around the world around green building, who are technical, who are knowledge, who work in very sort of complicated sort of development and redevelopment of cities, and then you have activists, and we all want the same thing. But rarely do we get together and figure out a practical path of how we're going to work to get our objectives met. And I don't think we've been helped over the years of sort of identifying, sort of what I consider sort of two future scenarios as they play out in social media, as they play out in sort of our pop culture. This notion of the Blade Runner future, this sort of horrible cities that, as we urbanize, these are going to be terrible places to live, and they're going to be sort of fantastical. We're going to go the other direction, and we're going to create sort of green cities of the sky. And I feel like we've been holding these two ridiculous sort of juxtaposition positions in how we think about cities. Technology is going to either save us, or we're going to be living a really diminished quality of life in the future. And when we think about the fact that we're urbanizing so rapidly, this doesn't frankly make me feel all that comfortable. It's sort of like a big greenscape, kind of greenwashing, a bunch of buildings. This doesn't feel like a place I'd want to live. I mean, it's very nice to look at, but this is the place I want to live. I want to live where there's a fine-grained, culturally driven city, where there are green buildings, where there is urban agriculture and food, where small business thrives, and there's a sense that we can connect with community. And this really does go back to the community, the scale of neighborhoods. Study after study shows the highest quality of life globally is in cities that have definable neighborhoods, and there's a sense of pride and connection to your neighborhood. It rarely starts with the city if it doesn't have the neighborhood at core. And Jane Jacobs, one of the great urbanists of our time in the US, and I think globally, really understood this when she stood up and helped fight for the saving of her community in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in New York City. She was trying to save that sort of fine-grained detail. I don't think our future is not this, particularly if our future of wanting a high quality of life and connection to one another. So how do we do this? Our organization was created to help build a framework to help practically move us in the direction of district scale, sustainable neighborhood development. We do a few things. First, organizationally, we take a lot from organizations like the Panama GBC and the US Green Building Council. We have to create a movement and a marketplace for this work. It has to be understandable. There have to be metrics. There has to be discipline about what we mean by district scale sustainability or urban regeneration. So we set up our nonprofit in partnership with some very powerful and forward-thinking friends, companies like Google and Arup, development companies like Lend-Lease, cities like the city of Portland and the city of Washington, D.C. Other engineering and architecture firms have shown up and helped build this organization and to build this mission around sustainable districts and cities. The second thing we're doing is we're building a global framework or standard for neighborhood development. Similar to LEED ND, if you're familiar with that, and other global district scale systems, but quite different in that it's process driven and it's built to recognize that district scale development has a temporal nature that's quite different than buildings. This standard is under development, and I'm going to talk about it for a few minutes, and it's going to be launched next spring at our annual conference. The next thing we need to do is to work with global projects that are really innovating in district scale work and start to knit together a series of projects that are learning from one another and who are really reaching and digging in to what sustainability means. It's not dissimilar, it's quite similar, in fact, to what the cohort of LEED buildings are doing globally. Those who are building LEED buildings are a community of practice, and we're looking to do the same with projects. We've launched 11 district scale projects in the last year in the US and Canada, and we expect more in the coming year. And then finally, we need to support these leaders through convenings and trainings, and that's what we do organizationally. So let me talk about the protocol. The protocol starts with a fundamental problem and challenge, and that is that there's not an integrated model for delivering district scale development that we could find globally. There's a few rating systems. They're kind of like green buildings at scale. But it's very difficult to take a green rating system for neighborhoods and apply it, because the way projects happen are quite different than they are for buildings. It's an online portal, and we're working with the GBCI to help design the verification and accreditation of this protocol. And it's really about aligning and shaping the interests of those who do district scale development, about shaping a governance model, a public-private civic partnership to deliver on those projects. It's intended to shape and guide projects through metrics-based analysis, and then ultimately reward the leaders and give them the sort of recognition that they deserve, much like we do in green building. It's intended to be what we say neighborhood agnostic. And what I mean by that is it can work in different settings, from existing neighborhoods to brownfields to institutional or corporate campuses. And how does it work? So with that kind of flexibility, we describe it as a loose fit framework to help guide those projects. It starts with three fundamental ingredients, what we call imperatives: equity, climate protection, and resiliency. These are fundamental drivers of the projects, and we're building metrics and sort of tools for these three topics to be embedded into the district projects and how they get ultimately verified. It's important that we're doing this because, as many of us know in green building, these issues either haven't been on the table explicitly or they're becoming much more important, like climate protection and resiliency is now. And what's important is that inside of those three imperatives are great strategies for delivering awesome green buildings and district scale projects. It includes metrics to guide projects. So we've got 6 performance areas around mobility, around economic development, around ecosystem stewardship, etc. What's important about those metrics are they're upstream and they're not backward facing. In essence, they're there to help shape the projects from the beginning, saying these are performance areas that you must address in your eco-district. The speed in which you get to climate neutrality or carbon zero and net zero energy is determined by the project's pathway, but that's a fundamental ingredient that must be addressed. And we do this by creating a process, a very specific process around forming an eco-district, creating a roadmap, guiding projects, and then ultimately reporting year in, year out on progress. We take inspiration and structural design from corporate sustainability as much as we do from green building. Because in companies, in corporate sustainability, it's about process, and it's about transparency, and it's about a deep commitment to metrics and to measuring progress. Because districts take many years to ultimately build out, and ultimately they're living organisms that are occupied in the decisions that get made about mobility, about where you shop, about human health, those things need to be monitored and measured over time for us to be able to direct investments that happen at the neighborhood level. And then finally, we report on these. And we're very interested in being able to move from sort of analog reporting to real-time data-driven reporting. Imagine your neighborhood here in Panama having a dashboard that's real-time, that sort of presents the performance of that neighborhood. What's the energy score of your neighborhood? What's the transportation mix of your neighborhood? How are people getting around? And ultimately, with devices like watches and smartphones, our health information and air quality information, things that we rarely could imagine we could monitor, are going to be made available. So we have the ability, through an open source platform, to create a reporting scheme for cities, but that get down to the neighborhood level and provide a way for neighbors and for those who invest in those neighborhoods, whether they be developers, whether they be the city to create a new recycling program, or to build a new set of bike infrastructure. There's data to help drive those investment decisions. How much time do I have? I know we're a little behind. So let me just say a few words about each of these steps, and then I'll close. First, on formation, as you can imagine, you guys are involved in green building. You know how difficult it is to get the engineer, the architect, the developer, the financier together to make agreements about how to build a green building. Well, we need to do that for neighborhoods. It's integrated design for district scale sustainability. And it's a very complicated landscape of municipal agencies, utility providers, real estate interests, public and private, public policy makers insisting we have low carbon solutions or public health solutions, local institutions who serve and provide services like schools and health clinics in neighborhoods. We are simply trying to put these actors together into a common framework to implement projects, and in essence ask a simple question about individual investments being made more powerful and more valuable if you collectively align those investments in a more coherent way. And I think we can see, if you've traveled outside Panama and if you've been to other cities, you can tell the sort of chaotic nature of city building. It's always going to be chaotic, but there is the opportunity to intervene to create more synergies and more better outcomes with a fair amount of work around governance and public-private partnership development. So that's the first order of business. It's driven by what we call collective impact or collaborative governance framing. And it's about co-creating the solution, co-understanding the challenges, and being much more explicit about what kind of outcomes you want to get to. This is very different than the traditional public engagement model, where we have urban planners or development companies sort of show off their plans, get a little feedback, and on you move through entitlement. This is about being clear about the investors, the key investors, not all the investors, the key investors of a particular district collaborating and getting a shared legal structure in place to help generate investments, to help guide their individual investments with a common framework. And if you do this, you get opportunities to create financing around key areas. Startup funding to help fund the collaboration and the collaborative that's going to work together. Governance funding that can get materialized in local improvement districts, in business improvement districts. Literally linking funding so that there is a repeatable tax base or tax generation for that district to guide those investments over time. To think about doing assessment together. One of our projects, they are doing an energy study and working with both consultants and then service providers collectively as a series of development interests that represent about 6 million square feet of development. They each have individual assets. They're now linking together to analyze options for energy efficiency and for renewable energy. and then ultimately for project finance, for individual projects. The second thing is creating a comprehensive roadmap for the work. And this is where much of the work, I think, for people in this room is going to be important. It's very rare in the US to have a carbon or an energy strategy done at the district level, to look at the stormwater or water balance impacts at the district level. And that's what we're bringing to the table with the protocol, is a rigorous sort of process in which analytics get done at the district scale, where you can look at a series of ecological footprint analyses, you can look at the current conditions, you can model for the future, and that helps you identify projects and load order those projects based on cumulative or expected impact. If you have upfront metrics, that helps you make decisions about what the investments you want to make, because you can match that back to what the expected impact of that investment could do. If you don't have that, then you're really just making investment decisions, not knowing what the cumulative impact will be. And so this is where the 6 priority areas come in as a way to shape how that analytics get done. And this is where our partnership with large companies like Arup and others to help us shape what this methodology needs to look like has become important. In taking action, what we're really trying to do is suggest it's more than just an endless sea of green buildings, that we're trying to create a strategy that it links green buildings at scale, that links smart infrastructure at scale, and then ultimately community programming at scale. So with buildings, you know, I think, and this is where the green building industry has been so powerful, is it creates these markers in community around innovative green buildings. These are 2 significant green buildings, each located in eco-district projects, where they're really helping shape what that agenda for the next generation of investment wants to look like. Sometimes they're integrated into existing infrastructure. This is an old winery, old brewery in my home city that now has become the largest concentration of LEED Platinum buildings, I think in the country at this point, within a 6-block radius. I think there's about 7 LEED Platinum buildings. All started because one developer took 4 blocks and created a district scale strategy for their development. And now it's created an ecosystem of other projects that link together, including the use of a district cooling facility. You know, this is really typical of many neighborhoods. This doesn't look so different to a certain extent from this neighborhood we're in here. What's happening here, though, is this is a totally integrated stormwater solution for this neighborhood. All the stormwater for the buildings and for the right-of-ways in the park and the street is managed collectively to reduce both the temperature of the water and and improve the quality of the water. It became a more affordable solution to do a district stormwater solution versus individual buildings being regulated as individual buildings by the city. So the city worked with the developers of this neighborhood to create more of a district approach. It's that same thinking is playing out in this district here, where a brand new streetscape in Plaza is also managing all the gray and black water for this project, keeping over 60,000 gallons of water out of the river every day, and being reused to flush toilets and to use for irrigation and to recharge the cooling towers in the buildings. On the infrastructure side, we're starting to see that that linking of transportation infrastructure into placemaking, whether it's the sort of, how multimodal use sort of comes together in ways that really set the signal about that transit is prioritized. It's going to go faster. Pedestrian and bicycle use is made more visible and is also prioritized in districts. where you're creating safe places very affordably, some green paint to create that cycling economy that the film talked about. Over $90 million goes into my local economy. The 23rd largest city in the US has a $90 million bicycle economy. This is not some joke. It's actually a major part of the transportation infrastructure. And wouldn't you know it, bicycles are really less impactful on our need to rebuild roads. So it really behooves cities to get people on the biking, you know, from a health and from a transportation cost perspective. The linking of park design with buildings. This park was the first park in the U.S. that took water from stormwater from the right-of-way of streets and surrounding the parks and created a biotope to clean the water and to create a park amenity. So it's, in essence, it's sort of showing the ecological design principles in real time and helping the city solve an issue around stormwater on the streets. This project I worked on in Vancouver, BC for the Olympics, 2010 Winter Olympics. This is the Athletes Village. The city's first attempt, and it's like Panama City, it's on the water, it's on a major body of water, to do stormwater management. They had never had the regulations or the requirements to do on-site stormwater, and they took a district approach, carefully bioengineered and geoengineered the slope of the neighborhood, so all the water sheds to this park and becomes a beautiful amenity that helps not only manage the stormwater, but create a really lovely park for children and families to play in. And you can start to see the integration of right-of-way in which it's, again, prioritizing things other than the automobile and doing the stormwater management. Green roofs at scale. This is, again, is the Olympic Village project. Interestingly, this has also allowed for us to do a passive design strategy because, of course, if you're building individual buildings, you don't have that luxury or that opportunity. We worked with the developers, the city, and the designers of this project to carefully model for passive airflow, for cooling opportunities with this pools that were designed inside, to maximize, obviously, daylight. We had to change the code to allow for staircases on the exterior to sort of prioritize walking and to create stack effects in these buildings so that airflow could come through and naturally ventilate areas that normally were conditioned. It allowed us, because of this strategy, to create a net zero energy project for seniors, a very affordable project because of the careful designing of not just that building, but how it integrated into the neighborhood. And in this project, one of North America's most significant expressions of low carbon energy. This is a district energy facility also serving the Olympic Village. This project was designed and developed by the city, a city that doesn't have any history of doing district scale energy work. In fact, has no history of really being in the energy investment or policy making. It now is. It spent $40 million to build this facility. It serves 7 million square feet. It returns a 7% ROI to the city beyond what their typical utility rate recovery allows for. And because it uses waste heat from sewage as its heat source, it is now outperforming and has been for the last couple of years the rest of the rest of the city as far as energy costs. It's able to keep its energy costs low while being 60% more efficient than a typical green building solution for carbon reductions. So this is a 60% improvement on greenhouse gas emissions from business as usual, which was some very high standard buildings, green building requirements. And finally, community action, and really thinking about, once you build a place, well, what's happening in that place, and how do you create a culture of engagement and involvement and reducing environmental footprint. My friend Jason Roberts, who founded Build a Better Block, he goes through neighborhoods and does things like this in a weekend, where They reimagines what a neighborhood could look like in neighborhoods that are poor, that don't have good infrastructure, that in some kinds are unsafe, in neighborhoods that don't have commercial, retail. And they do things like this to imagine for their city, what would it look like if we had these things? They use volunteers. It's a huge leverage point to, in essence, create citizen planners, citizen activists who are doing something. They're not just at City Hall. They're saying, screw City Hall, we're going to build our own neighborhood, and we're going to do it with volunteer labor. And this has become so popular in the US. It's a way to really reimagine some of the most terrible places that we've built in the US over the last 50 years. And it really forces the cities to think about speeding up their investments, changing regulations. In some cases, this is illegal, not the fact that you're doing this sort of, guerrilla style on a weekend. That's not, well, that is illegal, but it's primarily that many of the things like street trees and pedestrian, access and mixed use with commercial below, in some cases is literally illegal. The zoning code doesn't allow for it. And it forces the city to update its work. People like Erin Barnes, she's a board member of mine. She's helped create a new funding platform to help communities transform their neighborhoods into gardens and to help them renovate homes. It's called IOBI. And the average gift of an IOBI contributor is $35 US. The average giver lives within 6 blocks of the project. It's creating new financing for micro-scale projects in neighborhoods. These people don't show up in our development planning, but they are making tremendous investments in the communities. And in some cases, really connecting beyond the neighborhood and creating, in this case, strategies around urban to rural food connections. In many places where Erin's financing happens are in food deserts, where there's a lack of access to quality food. And then finally, the final step, of course, is what I've been talking about and referencing, is you got to manage, these assets. And if you don't have governance that is in the business day to day of monitoring the results, we won't get the kind of progress we want. So with the protocol, we've created a dashboard. And as I mentioned earlier, we think there's a great opportunity for this to become more real-time data. And in a way to really sort of powerfully transform how we think about neighborhood development by showcasing what's happening, how the performance is going, what really needs to be worked on, and where there's some real wind behind the work and real progress being made. So I encourage you to join us. We hope to be opening up an Ecodistricts affiliate in Mexico, Canada, and Australia later this year. We'd love to see one in this region, including membership, including training, including something that we're about to launch this fall called the Ecodistrict Studio. So I look forward to being here for the rest of the conference. Happy to get you more information on the protocol if that's of interest to the projects you lead. And encourage you to participate in some of our programs. One thing we have done in the past is bring emergent district scale projects to Portland for a 3-day intensive program. And we're going to launch that program, which we call Incubator, in Australia and Canada later this year. So happy to be here, really pleased, and I want to thank Roberto again and Patricia for having me. Thanks very much.